So, Michael, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, not bad at all. Thank you. Really excited to have you on again. And I believe you're going to give us an update on the crash retrieval presentation.
That is correct. That is correct. Absolutely. All right. So why don't we go ahead and get into this? And as a review, the source material where I'm getting this from is Leonard Stringfield's book on UFO crash retrieval, status reports 1 through 7. And this is the publication where that has all the references for the crash retrievals, the people who held the bodies, people who dealt with the debris, people who loaded military firsthand sources, who loaded these craft onto 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy trucks and shipped them to Wright Patterson Air Force Base. So we're talking about firsthand military sources who had direct experience with the craft and the bodies. Now, I also want to mention Ryan Wood has recently published a new book called Magic Eyes Only, which is a republication of the same title he did almost 20 years ago now. He's updated it with 104 crash retrieval cases. So when we link that with the cases from Leonard Stringfield, conservatively, we've got about 200 cases. Now let's take out 50 of those. We're left with a good 150 references here. So really the odds are in our favor. And I want to point out this case here. This is from Ryan's book, Cherry Creek, Nevada, summer 1964, page 243 in the book. So I want to give people an idea where I'm getting this so you can independently verify this on your own. And you can see there's not a whole lot going on here in Cherry Creek, Nevada. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this took place summer 1964. So here's the map. And you can see in 2012, the population was 72 people. So there's not really a lot going on here. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this has to do with a copper ore train that was kind of making a slight curve around the bend. And are you seeing this on your end?
I'm only seeing the initial slide. It's not changed for me.
Not changed for you.
There we go. That changed then.
Okay, I'm going to leave it in this mode. So we have to stay in this slide mode here. We can't go to full screen. Okay, so here's the map that shows you what the population was back in 2012. So it was only 72 people. Okay, now we'll go to the next slide, and hopefully that's tracking on your end here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the copper ore cars, and in the report published by Ryan in his book, he states that as they were coming around this bend, something bizarre happened. I mean, it's just really crazy. What they said here, we'll go to the next slide, is they stopped the train, and right ahead, all the tracks were mangled, they were bent, they were torn up, and they saw, a rather medium-sized polished aluminum disc-shaped craft flipped over 90 degrees on its other side, so that'd be 180 degrees. There was a hull breach on the side of the craft, and they saw 2 ET bodies. There were 3 female ranchers watching all of this. Now, when the train stopped, they all rode away. And I'm just going to go over here the bullet items here. The tracks were torn apart and thrown like pretzels. So that's the direct quote here. The Ely sheriff was alerted, who informed the Ely Armory to dispatch the local National Guard. The military ordered all people on the train to board a truck and were driven back to Ely. Military examined the craft and found the bodies of at least 2 little pilots. So that's kind of the sight picture here. I'm going to go to the next slide. And this is a illustration by Evan, a friend of mine that I'm working with. And he's kind of done a good job. This gives you an idea of what this may have looked like back in 1964. So you can see off to the right, the train tracks were bent. They were mangled up. The craft has been tipped over on its dome. And then there's a debris trail. So he encapsulated it pretty well. Now, to kind of close out this particular case, they had to bring in the largest crane by rail to pick this thing up. And then they put this on 2 trucks and then shipped it out of here. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is a blow up, kind of give you an idea of what this retrieval operation looked like. Definitely had damage on the craft itself. And then as this thing augured in, it ripped up all the train tracks. So that makes sense. Now, here is what we came up with of them lifting this thing out of here and then putting it on the trucks and shipping it away. So again, this is 1964 timeframe. Let's go to the next case here. Fort Riley, Kansas, A lot of good references on this one. So this is December 10th, 1964. The primary source served in the infantry, 1st Division, name is Aaron Quebec. It's talked about before. UFO crash retrievals, page 24 in Leonard's book, Abstract 20. So this particular military personnel this was a nighttime operation. He was with 3 others, and they were told to board a 6x6 troop transport. I've got the map here of Camp Forsyth where all this went down. So once they drive about a half a mile from their location, they get out, they go into a large field, and what they saw was an incredible scene. There was a helicopter going back and forth, a UH-1 helicopter shining a spotlight down on the scene. And what they saw was a 48-foot diameter dish-shaped craft, about 18 feet tall. It had a series of box-like protrusions wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. There was a fin at the terminating section in the center that swept back toward the trailing edge. Below that, there was what looked like an exhaust port. So let me take you to my first passed kindergarten SolidWorks rendering here, just to give an idea of what this looked like. And then I'll go to Rudy's drawing. This is Rudy's drawing that shows you the scene. Now, they had people with Geiger counters walking around this thing, and his job was to guard this craft. You can see the Huey UH-1 helicopter. So we wanted to take the original report from the Stringfield file, hook that up with Rudy's drawing, and we came up with this full color rendering by Joseph Wraith, just to give an idea of what this scene may have looked like. Very interesting, because we've got 2 independent sources after this event that confirm that this event actually took place. One of them, in point of fact, saw the craft on an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy truck with a tarp on top secured by chains leaving the area after this actually happened. Here's another viewing perspective. We've kind of zoomed in a little bit closer here. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And this shows you the M123 tractor-trailer that they may have used to actually move this thing out. Now, when this secondary source saw the craft being moved from the location, he said there were chemical, biological protective suits that were being worn by this team. So we at least have one separate source that confirms this was a real retrieval operation. Now, I'm going to go to this slide. And, I've always debated whether I should include this in this presentation, but it's part of the Stringfield collection. It's part of the narrative, so it actually belongs within this presentation. No matter how bizarre it might sound, it's still part of the collection. So this is U.S. Air Force Museum, Dayton, Ohio, 1965, page 93 in the book, case A11. So what you're seeing here are the multiple hangars. Now, they've added on from here, but they're constantly updating the Air Force Museum. And I highly recommend anyone who has any interest in aerospace, aircraft design, airplanes, World War II, multiple, they've got things from Vietnam, they've got, everything is there. So it's just a great facility. So back to our story here, 1965. There's a couple that was looking at the V2 rocket display. And what you're looking at is the exact same display they were looking at back in 1965. So you've got the husband and wife there. They're just kind of observing this V2 rocket. And all of a sudden, the husband bails on his wife. He kind of leaves her stranded just next to this V2 rocket. And he starts wandering the back halls of the Air Force Museum. He busts through a double door. And what does he see? He sees an ET about 3.5 feet tall, wearing a crinkled mercury aluminum spacesuit. He had a helmet on top. He was pointing his index finger toward the primary eyewitness. Within 10 seconds, all of the buzzers and alarms and sirens go off inside the Air Force Museum. So up around the left-hand corner, you can see the wife with the V2. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see all the military, police, and guards and personnel at the museum ushering people out the doors when all the alarms went off. So what we believe happened here, and this is mentioned in the Stringfield report, is that somehow this ET being made it out of its underground containment center and was wandering the back halls of the Air Force Museum. Believe it or not, it's part of the Stringfield collection here. Next one. Wright Patterson Air Force Base in 1966. The source was a civil service electrician, page 17 in the book. So he is working at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and one night he came home and he had a trench coat on. His son was there that day, and he reached into his trench coat pocket and pulled out an 8x10 black and white glossy photograph that depicted a southwestern scene. There was what looked like a lab coat technician. He was kind of in this white suit, and then there was a guy with khakis, kind of more of a military personnel, and they were holding up a dead ET corpse that was about 4 feet tall, oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit, holding it by its wrists. And this kid is looking at this thing. He cannot believe this. So this is Rudy's drawing that gives you an idea of what this may have looked like. Now, it did not end well for this guy. Personnel back at Wright Patterson Air Force Base discovered this was missing. When he went to mourning the next day, he was fired on the spot. So he essentially illegally snuck this out of the base to show his son, and then got into big trouble, lost his job over it. All right, so next one. Southwest, July 3rd, 1967. We don't have an exact location, but I believe it was Arizona. Primary source was a Marine. His rank was private first class, page 86 in Leonard's book, case A5. So in this case, the primary source boarded a plane with blacked out windows. They flew to what we believe to be Arizona, somewhere in Arizona at an unimproved runway. Now, there was a couple of buildings off to the left. There was a Quonset-style prefabricated hangar off to the right. His job was to guard this hangar and ask no questions at all. He was told not to ask any questions about this. By day 3 in the report, curiosity got the best of this guy. So as you can see in Rudy's drawing here, he actually opened up these flaps and looked inside, and you can see him looking inside. And what he saw, and this is in the report, first of all, there were lab coat technicians wearing these white lab coats. That's the first thing. Now, near the back of the hangar, there was a series of workbench tables that had metallurgical testing equipment on them. There were calipers, there were micrometers, kind of like analysis equipment. Off to the right in Rudy's drawing, there was a walk-in freezer with body bags. Taking up the center of this thing was about a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft with a dome on top. That's mentioned in the report. So we want to use this as a guide. I'm going to go to the next slide. And now you can see Rudy's, this is Joel Christopher Payne's full color rendering of the best of our ability. That gives you an idea of what this may have looked like if we could have been there back in what we believe to be Arizona type area here. Now, a couple new things I'm adding here. I'm going through Stringfield files with a very meticulous fine-tooth comb. Some of these I don't have all the information on them, and there's not a lot of reference material to develop a full color illustration, but I want to mention that something appears to have been going down near Big Springs, Texas. Some type of recovery operation during 1968 near Big Springs, Texas. Don't have a lot of other details, but it's in the Stringfield report. So this is something that at least we should mention here. Next case, this is Fort Hood, Texas, late 1960s. This was a private pilot. This is page 91 in Leonard's book. Now, to set this up, I believe this is 1968, and the private pilot was flying a Cessna 172, and he was having some problems. So within Fort Hood is something called Gray Army Airfield. He actually made an emergency landing on the unimproved runway at Gray Army Airfield. And if you look on the upper left of this drawing, you'll see our pilot landing, and he's out of the plane. Within about 30 seconds, there was a Jeep rushing to the plane, and they had two MPs with handguns pointed at him. He was out of the plane. He has his hands up. Now, while all this is going on, there's a large 400 feet by 400 feet bay door that opens up. You would never know that there's anything there because the topographical section on the top of these bay doors blended in with the surrounding landscape. So there was, low brush, there was low trees, there was a rocky terrain. I mean, it looks just like the surrounding terrain. You would never know that it's the underground entrance to a large facility underground. Now, what he said in the report, it talks about how there are multiple UFO reports originating from this area. Now, these UFOs were reported to be escorted by military helicopters like UH-1s and CH-47 Chinooks, double rotor Chinook helicopters. So what we believe this is, it is an underground staging area for UFO test flights that are being escorted by military helicopters. So this is described within this report here. So the question is there a vast top secret underground facility located at Gray Army Airfield? A couple of quick notes here. This is within the Stringfield collection that plays a major role in this slide here. The Colonel, this is from Tony Blon, researcher, to Colonel X, page 100. The Colonel stated that underground installations, as well as isolated areas of military reservations, have squadrons of unmarked helicopters which have sophisticated instrumentation on board that are dispatched to areas of UFO activity to monitor these craft or airlift them out of the area if one has malfunctioned. So, you still with me?
Yes, absolutely. Fascinating.
Okay, good. I want to ask you a question. What does this remind you of when you hear about a UFO that possibly malfunctioned and then it needs to be airlifted out? Does that ring a bell?
I mean, it sounds like Roswell, really.
A little bit. Anything else?
I can't think of, nothing jumps to mind. I'm sure that there is something.
Well, we'll get into it here. Okay, next one. Quote, the technology that is being applied in this underground complex would remind someone of a science fiction thriller. It is unbelievable what they know and can do from this area. So bottom line is, if you take this all together as a whole here, there is absolutely multiple deep underground military bases sprinkled throughout the United States. This has been going on for 60, 70 years. Who knows the extent of what's going on? A lot of these are connected via high-speed tunnel train systems. We've heard about that. This colonel is confirming what we have already heard for decades now. So I'm going to go to the next slide. These are the type aircraft that are being used in these recovery operations. And we know the names of the pilots, believe it or not. Wow. They're called Bluebirds. They're the ones that are sent out as a rapid response mobilization team to retrieve down UFOs, malfunction UFOs. They do test flight chasing with UFOs. They're involved in setting up diversionary tactics, kind of like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when they said in the movie, we need something so scary it will clear out 300 square miles from, the whole thing. That's paraphrased, but the bottom line is they have diversionary tactics. They set up, quote unquote, railroad car derailments. They set up oil spills, to keep people away. They set up blinds. That's what these guys do. These guys are professionals. So back to the question. That leads us to the Cash-Landrum incident, December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. I'm going to rip through this relatively quickly here. So you've got Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, Colby Landrum. They're driving down the road at around 9:30 p.m. at night. They're going home because they were trying to find a bingo thing, and they didn't have a lot of success. So they're driving down the road. All of a sudden, it was Colby Landrum that saw a bright light off to the right-hand side of the road, approaching their area. I mean, at the beginning, it was nothing more than a bright light. But as it got closer, this thing lit up the entire localized area. So Betty slams on the brakes. And, this is where it starts getting hysterical here. and she is about 150 feet in back of a large 90-foot tall double ice cream cone vehicle with the wide ends meeting in the center. There's a series of porthole windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. It's emitting a blue-colored flame and a roaring noise. So every time this thing would bob down, the blue-colored flame would come out, and then this thing would bob back up again. Now, Betty decides, you know what, I want to take a good look at this thing. So she exits the driver's side door, walks toward the hood of the vehicle, and now she's looking at this thing at close range. And after a few minutes, she walks back to the door handle, grabs the door handle, and burns her hand. And remember, this is basically wintertime, 1980. When she got back in the vehicle, it was so hot that they had to turn the air conditioning on in the car. So I thought that was interesting. Now, when this thing passed away and it flew out of range, Vicki Landrum, Colby Landrum, and Betty basically counted 23 double rotor Chinook CH-47 helicopters chasing after this thing with spotlights. So in a nutshell, that's the case. I'm going to go to the next slide here. This gives you another idea. This is by Joel Payne. Want to give him credit. Gives you an idea what this thing may have looked like if we were there. Now, Betty is gone. Vicki is gone. Colby is the last surviving member of this incident. And this went all the way to unsolved mysteries. This is one of those top 3 cases within ufology. So what I want to do now is I want to take you to the detailed map so that you can follow the track here. So here's the map. On the upper side here, you can see the location of Betty's car. And then about 150 feet down southbound on the map, you've got X marks the spot. That's where the thing came down. The flight path was from the northeast to the southwest, and you can see kind of the flight path this took. Now, I want to mention, too, we'll go to the next slide here. Here's Clarion Ledger, December 25th, 1983. What did 3 Texans encounter? So you've got Betty Cash, you've got Colby Landrum, you've got Vicki Landrum, you've got John Schuessler, basically the originator of MUFON. He was the principal investigator in the case. Okay, now, a couple of things happened. Number one, within a matter of minutes, really, almost instantaneously, all 3 witnesses suffered from the severe effects of radiation poisoning, like within a matter of minutes. They had horrible stomach pains, hair came out, nails were rough, degraded skin, just a whole host of medical problems. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because after this event happened, it was confirmed by John Schuessler. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. This is the map that shows you where this thing happened. According to John Schuessler, when this thing was hovering over the pavement and the flames were coming down, it left a huge burn mark on the pavement on the road. The Army Corps of Engineers came over and they dug up the road and they paved over it. 2 weeks later, they came back a second time, dug it up, and repaved it a second time. So there's something going on here. The United States military is absolutely involved. They could have come from Gray Army Airfield, the underground facility. This may have been associated with a NEPA program, Nuclear Energy for Propulsion of Aircraft program. This may be involved with the Atomic Energy Commission. You've got Los Alamos being involved in this. You've got Oak Ridge National Labs. And so you can see that this is not an Air Force project. This is a U.S. Navy project in conjunction with the Atomic Energy Commission and Los Alamos that were building these nuclear-powered spacecraft, atomic-powered spacecraft, and that explains possibly what happened. There was a hole breach in the side of the craft, and all this fissionable material started spewing out, and that's what caused the radiation sickness of the 3 primary eyewitnesses. Right. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. So this gives you an idea of how large this facility is. It's so large that in the same report, there's mention of a 4-engine C-130 4-engine cargo transport plane landing here. So not only is it a staging area for test flights of UFOs, most likely man-made UFOs, but it's also an underground runway. You can land a C-130 in this thing. That's the level of what we're talking about here, just staggering implications. So, and we wonder why toilet seat covers cost $300 and hammers cost $900. And when we have congressional hearings, every time we have these congressional hearings, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't have any legs. It never goes anywhere. We just had hearings a year from this past July, and it didn't go anywhere. They're always talking about we don't have any physical evidence for all this. Well, all you got to do is go to Gray Army Airfield where the underground facility is, and you'll get all the physical evidence you need. But the problem is that these senators and congressmen, number one, they don't have a need to know. And number two, they don't have a high enough security clearance. So
Right.
how can they get access to something that they have never been cleared on? That's the problem we're running into here. The people in Washington, D.C., they're not going to be read into these programs. The president isn't even aware of these programs. He's a temporary employee. They're not going to read him into this. So that's the wall that we're up against here. Let's continue on. California City, summer 1971. Source, Debbie Clayton, page 233 in the book. Now, what she talks about is a loud noise. California City, it's not a big place here. So there were about 4 eyewitnesses that walked over to where they had some housing going on, and they saw a dish-shaped craft, mushroom section on the top, about 10 feet wide, 5 feet high. One of the witnesses was taking photographs of this thing because people in the town, they actually heard this thing, they walked over, they saw it with their own eyes. So this guy is snapping photographs, and you can follow along in the book. I provided the page number. Within about 5 minutes, there was a convoy of military vehicles. One of the military personnel ordered this gentleman to stop taking photographs. He slammed the camera to the ground, ordering them to leave. They did see them hoist this thing up on a tractor trailer and then move this to where we believe to be Edwards North Base Complex, which is in the local vicinity. It's not that far away, so we believe that's where it was taken.
Right.
So now we want to talk about this legendary story. I can't prove it's true. I don't think anybody can prove it's true, but there's a story within ufology that's been going around for decades. It has reached legendary status now. This is the alleged Homestead Air Force Base, February 19th, 1973, where President Richard Nixon was very good friends with comedian Jackie Gleason. This is well known. They were good friends, and we know for a fact that Jackie Gleason had a huge interest in UFOs. So let's go to the next slide here. The Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter by Paul Blake Smith. I want to give him credit. He wrote a really good book. He makes a very good case out of this here. Now, the beginning of this case is 100% authentic. So here you see Jackie Gleason, Richard Nixon at the Charity Golf outing in Florida, February 19th, 1973. So right around the ninth hole, the story of UFOs came up. And so Jackie Gleason turns to the president and says, Mr. President, I've really got an interest in this subject. Is there anything that you can tell me? I mean, I know you're the president, and is there something you can tell me? So Richard Nixon turns to Jackie Gleason and says, Jackie, if you'll be available later tonight, I might be able to help you with that. So as the legend goes, later that night around 11:30, there's a knock on the door. Jackie Gleason gets up, opens the door, and it's Richard Nixon in the doorway. And he says, Jackie, why don't you come follow me? So he brings Jackie in his car, driving himself. The president himself is driving alone with Richard Nixon. They go to Homestead Air Force Base. They are challenged by the guard, but the guard immediately recognizes it's the president and waves him through. They go to kind of a private area where there's a above ground hangar. Richard Nixon goes into this facility with Jackie Gleason and proceeds to show him, I'm going to move on to the next slide here, at least 5 to 6 vintage Coke freezers. Inside the Coke freezers are the mangled and burnt remains of what look like child-size extraterrestrial corpses, at least 5 of them. Off to the right, there were blue-colored bins with what would appear to be some type of debris from a crash retrieval. Now, this is interesting because this color blue keeps popping up again and again when you talk about UFO research. So you've got the blue-colored bins, you've got Project Blue Book, you've got the Blue Boys that fly the helicopters, you've got Operation Blue Fly, you've got something called Project Blue Bolt. I could go on all day with this reference to blue being associated with UFOs and ET technology. So there's some type of correlation here going on. So now, as the legend goes, and I'm going to go to the next slide. This gives you an idea of what these Coke freezers look like. So you can imagine Jackie Gleason looking inside this thing, just completely shocked. And here he is, the great one, looking at the body here. And as the story goes, when he came down back that night, which would have been almost the next morning, early the next morning, he plopped down on his couch and he was a changed man. He was never the same again. He was absolutely the same again. So what I started doing is I started looking at this. Could this be true? Do we have any evidence to back this up? So this is Fort Lauderdale News, February 1st, 1973. It says Florida's most star-studded sports event, Super Golf with Superstars. And then you got Jackie Gleason here. Here's a blow-up. 1973 Jackie Gleason Inverary National Airlines Classic, February 19th through the 25th. So the date is checking out here. Next one. President Nixon and host Gleason smiling in the rain. Tampa Tribune, February 20th, 1973. So, absolutely, Richard Nixon was on the golf course with Jackie Gleason. That's not in question here. Miami Herald, February 20th, 1973. Here's Richard Nixon addressing the crowd here with Jackie Gleason directly in back of him. And then I started looking at, could the president pull this off? Could he secretly drive from Miami to Homestead Air Force Base? Could he pull this off back at that time frame? So it's 38 minutes and it's a 28 nautical mile trip to get there. So somewhere around 11:30 p.m. back at that time frame, I'm sure he could make it in less than 38 minutes, probably more like 25 minutes, because there'd be no traffic at that hour back at that time frame. So conceivably, he could have picked up Jackie, drove him to Homestead Air Force Base, could have spent 15 minutes there, driving him back. It would have taken no more than an hour and a half, so it could have been feasible. Now, Paul Blake Smith states that the other possibility is he was flown via helicopter to Homestead Air Force Base. So I went over to the Richard Nixon Library where they have Richard Nixon's helicopter there, the very same helicopter that he departed on. And I asked the reference person there if he had ever seen or heard anything about this, which they didn't know anything about this. So I kind of talked to them and everything. And he said, well, you can't take pictures of the interior of the helicopter. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you look the other way, you won't know if I took a photograph or you wouldn't know if I did. So he did do that. And so I got photographs of all the interior of the helicopter and exactly where Jackie Gleason was sitting with Richard Nixon. So I got all those photographs. I can't confirm that Nixon was flown to Homestead Air Force Base to see the body. So I asked for the manifest from the librarian at the research library at the Nixon Library, and they gave it to me, and Jackie Gleason's name is not on that list. So I don't know if that proves anything or it doesn't, but I'm just saying that I did make an effort to track that down. So let's go to the next one here. Dayton Daily News, May 14th, 1993. Jackie Gleason claimed that Richard Nixon took him to Homestead Air Force Base and he viewed alien bodies. That's written about in a book here, and it isn't just Jackie Gleason. Let's go to the next one. The Times Tribune, July 5th, 1987. In her unpublished biography of the funny man entitled The Great One, Beverly Gleason's second spouse described a bizarre trip Jackie took with then-president in 1973 to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida to see what she says were the bodies of 4 dead space aliens recovered by the Air Force. Now, bottom line is, She never published this great one biography. It was never published. So this was just something that was talked about. It was never actually published.
Right.
Times Tribune, March 15th, 1985. Larry W. Bryant, who is the director of the organization, wrote back that there have been reports that MacDill, that's in Tampa, Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, and Homestead Air Force Base near Miami have all served as way stations or temporary repositories for crashed saucer artifacts. So this is what we've got here. This could be a true story, or it could be just a legend. We just don't know. We don't have enough meat on the bones to absolutely confirm that this actually took place. However, if we follow the theory of no single point failure, there's no way that the United States government is going to put all their eggs in one basket. They are going to diversify their portfolio, and they're going to have things and assets at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. They're going to have things at MacDill Air Force Base. They're going to have things at Eglin Air Force Base. They're going to have also craft and bodies potentially at Edwards North Base Complex. They're going to spread these assets so if there's an earthquake or a fire, they don't lose everything. They have to do this by default. It makes sense. Okay, let's go to the next one. Great Lakes Naval Training Center, September 1973. Primary source was a gunnery school instructor, and he guarded a Quonset-style building. UFO crash retrievals, page 89, case Evans. So our primary source was told to deliver a very important letter to a high-level military brass that it was at the Quonset hut at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. This is September 1973. So he's escorted by two military guards. He walks down this corridor. He makes a left-hand turn. He's now in this vast open area. And what does he see? He sees a 35-foot-long teardrop-shaped craft, 12 feet high, on a platform or pedestal. And he said that there was a lip or seam going around from one side to the other. There was a blue coronal discharge coming from the front of the craft. So this was kind of the first pass drawing that shows you the dimensions. Here is my SolidWorks rendering of what this thing looked like. Let's go to the next slide. This was not a USO type thing where it was a saucer shaped. No, this was elliptical, teardrop shaped USO. This is what we believe this actually is, according to the report. So here's Rudy's drawing of him delivering the letter to the high level military brass, being escorted. And then he's looking at this thing, walking right by it. Can't believe it. So we wanted to use this as a guide, go to the full color rendering, and here is Joseph Ray's full color rendering of what this may have looked like if we were there delivering the letter. Now, do we have any proof of this? Do we have any proof at all? Well, it turns out 2 weeks before this happened, the primary source was at a bar. He was talking with a sailor in San Diego. He came from San Diego, and what he said, it says that 2 weeks earlier, the primary eyewitness met a sailor in San Diego who told him that a teardrop-shaped UFO was shot down by a guided missile destroyer between Hawaii and the mainland in June 1973. Now, within the Stringfield collection, there's a sketch that I don't have, but the sketch, according to our primary source, matched identically to what he had seen at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. Let me go to the next slide here. Now, in the report, it also states that Howard Hughes's Glomar Explorer lifted this USO off the bottom of the ocean. So it wasn't just to take and look for minerals and lift up the Russian submarine that went to the bottom of the ocean, but they were secretly recovering down USOs from the bottom of the ocean. I don't know how many, but probably more than one. We're talking about the deepest of the black programs here. They're never going to admit to them recovering these things, but this is in the report. So, how CIA divers retrieve Russian secrets. San Francisco Examiner, March 19th, 1975. We'll go to the next one here. So here it is, A Matter of Risk, the incredible inside story of the CIA's Hughes Glomar Explorer mission to raise a Russian submarine. During 1973 to 1974, a Russian submarine was recovered from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. However, That's not all that was recovered. So we'll move on to Howard Hughes here, and he must have known about this because basically it was his ship.
Yeah.
According to RK's informant, the object was retrieved by the Glomar explorer, shipped to Hawaii, and then sent stateside, finally to Chicago. A sketch of the craft was drawn by the sailor, and according to RK, there was little doubt that it was the same object he had seen in the Quonset hut. So we had secondary independent confirmation of this teardrop shaped USO, which was seen by the sailor on the missile destroyer, and then also seen by the gunnery instructor over at Great Lakes. So we have two sources for this one. Okay, next one. Norton Air Force Base, 1973, Air Force photographer, page 160, case 14 in the book. All right, so just to set this up, our photographer is based in Hawaii. He had his security clearance upgraded. So he flies from Hawaii to Norton Air Force Base, which is in San Bernardino, California. It is now an airport and basically a maintenance facility.
Right.
When he gets there, he is joined with another photographer. They go in kind of an Air Force car. They're driven 1 hour by car from Norton Air Force Base, and then all of a sudden, the car stops. Do you have any idea what happens next?
I can only imagine if the car stops, not by itself, that an object appears.
Sort of. Okay, so next thing that happens is that the floor drops. So this is the entrance to an underground facility, like it's a huge elevator lift bringing the car down into a large underground facility. So when they get there, we move on to the next slide here, and I've got the reference here. They get to the bottom where the facility is. They're told to strip down nude and put on these medical smocks. So now they have these clean room things. You know, when you go into a transistor thing and it's a clean room, they have these white smocks. Yeah, this is what they were wearing. Now, he said that there was a crane supporting by a netting a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. And I'm going to repeat that because it's important. The primary source said that this flying saucer that was lifted by a crane in a netting was 30 feet in diameter. Now, they had both men go inside one of these boom lifts with a bucket, and they were able to crawl inside the entryway hatch. And when they got in here, I'm going to hit you with the direct quote. This is from the witness. Quote, "I could have thrown a football as hard as I could and not hit the other side." This thing is only 30 feet in diameter. So there's something going on with the interior of this craft. There was like a space-time continuum. There was some visual warpage of time space. Something was going on, and we've got at least two other cases of this phenomenon as well. So they are told to photograph the interior of this craft. This is Rudy's drawing bubble here on the enlargement on the upper left-hand side. So they're taking photographs of the interior. So they've got display panels and switches. Later, when they exited the craft, they were also told to take photographs of at least two ET bodies involved in an autopsy. And that's what they did here. So we'll move on to the next slide. So here you can see the craft being suspended by an overhead crane. It could very possibly be an overhead lift crane as well. And we'll go to the next one. This is by Joseph Wraith. I want to give him credit. Here's a blow up here of the netting that they used for the overhead crane. And then this is what the interior may have looked like. So we had to come up with something cavernous, large, something that you could throw a football as hard as you could, not hit the other side. You could do that here. So this is our best representation. And then this is the interior room with the autopsies going on. So they've got this stuff. They have the photographs because they were told to take these photographs. Now, that leads us to this question again about the congressional hearings, where they keep on telling us that they don't have any physical evidence. They don't have any hardware. They don't have any motion picture film reels. They don't have any 8x10 black and white glossy photographs. Well, I challenge them on this because we've got an Air Force photographer, two of them, telling us that that's what their job was, to document this entire scene. So somewhere out there, there is a repository where they keep all of these motion picture film reels, the gun camera footage from World War II, the autopsy documents, the pathologist report, all of this is being kept from the American people and senators and congressmen in Washington, D.C. We'll go to the next slide here. So I couldn't just leave it at that, right? I had to do some more digging.
Sure.
So I've got LA Times, June 11th, 1972. And you can see here, LA to New York in half an hour, 10,000 mile an hour tunnel train plan developed. So here you see the cutaway here. They've got the drawing. I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this shows you the vacuum pumps, the lateral coils. You can see the seating arrangement. And this is back in 1972 from the LA Times. I mean, it's a done deal at this point. They've already had. Now, how can we prove that these underground tunnels actually exist and they've got these 10,000 mile an hour tube tunnel train? How do we prove this? Is there any evidence? So I came across this document. Project RAND, Proceedings of the Second Protective Construction Symposium, Deep Underground Construction, March 24th, 25th, 26th, 1959 by the RAND Corporation. Here's what they say. It says, just as airplanes, ships, automobiles have given man mastery of the surface of the earth, tunnel boring machines and shaft sinkers will give him access to the subterranean world. It is our aim to provide machines which will supply the ever-increasing demand in mining and construction of underground facilities, as this was written back in 1959. So you can see here, they've laid out the plans, they've got the technologies, they've got the tunnel boring machines. This has been going on for decades now. So yes, indeed, it does check out. More than likely, they do have all of these deep underground military bases connected by high-speed tube tunnel trains. Actionable item. Senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should locate this facility, find out what is stored there, and what other underground installations this may be connected to. I doubt it's going to happen because senators and congressmen, they just don't have a high enough security clearance. They're not going to be read into these programs. We have quote unquote President Biden. You think they're going to clear him on this kind of a thing? No way.
No.
Not a chance. No chance.
Before you continue, Michael, just so you're aware of, I only actually set aside an hour for this.
Okay.
If you think it will go on more, we can always do another part, next week or whenever you're free again.
No problem. We got enough to go to the next ice age, but we'll cut it off at the hour mark. I'm going to do a couple more cases here.
Sure.
McClellan Air Force Base, California, 1973. And this has to do with someone that I think you may know. I don't know him personally, but I know of him. This is page 153 in the book. And this has to do with Ellison Onizuka, case 3. So we'll go to the next slide here. And here is test pilot Ellison Onizuka. He was a test pilot before he became an astronaut. And according to Chris Kofi, we've got the reference here. So let me set this up. He's at McClellan Air Force Base, and this is back in 1973. And he's told to go into a briefing room with other pilots. So they get in there. When they get in there, it's a little bit dark, and there is a Air Force personnel standing next to a video projector, a film projector. And this guy turns on the film projector, and everyone's looking at the screen here. And what they show is about a 5 to 6 minute film clip depicting 2 ET bodies on slabs. And then it moves to another scene showing a craft and some debris. And he's absolutely, shocked at what he's seeing. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And this shows you what the scene may have looked like. You can see Ellison off to the left, and you see the film being produced here. They were on 2 concrete slabs. And he remembered thinking, "Oh my God!" This is like his direct quote when he was interviewed by Chris Kofi. Now that brings us to this little reference here. This is by Open Minds, August 19, 2014. Witness says that top secret UFO library existed at McClellan Air Force Base. David Armstrong claims his aunt used to work for a top secret UFO records library at McClellan Air Force Base. In his 20s, Armstrong went to visit her, and knowing he had an interest in the subject, Armstrong says his aunt let him take a look at the files. So here we've got one source claiming that there was a motion picture film reel depicting ET corpses and wreckage. Then we've got this source talking about there being a library where his aunt worked, where they had photographs, they had files, they had records. So we've got independent secondary sources here. Let's go to the next slide. So this is astronaut Onizuka, who I think everyone listening to this probably knows about because he was involved in the Challenger accident on January 28th, 1986, where Krista McAuliffe was killed, Ellison was killed, along with the other astronauts. Not going to go into the implications of all that, but I will say that there was arrangements made between Leonard Stringfield, who was going to interview Ellison Onizuka, and we had the date set. It was all set. Now, 2 weeks prior to this, the Challenger accident happened, and they never got a chance to meet. So we were within this close of getting his direct testimony via Leonard Stringfield, but it never happened because he died in the Challenger explosion. Now, I tracked down his widow, and I sent her that sketch that Rudy made, and I sent the reference within Leonard's publication. Right. I know I got the address correct. I know I did because I knew where she was living. I never got a response. So I don't know if she didn't want to respond to me or Ellison never told her about this, but he's not the only one who had seen this film. This thing has been shopped around to different Air Force bases around the country, and they're using this as a trial balloon to see if our top military pilots could handle this new reality. I think their thing is that if our pilots freak out over this, how much more so would the general public? They couldn't handle this new reality. So they wanted to use a trial balloon to see if they could handle this. So that appears to be what's going on here. Okay, we'll do one more case. So this is Wright Patterson Air Force Base in 1974, page 327 in the book. You have a new hire who has given her 2-week notice. She is scheduled to report to Wright Patterson Air Force Base after her 2 weeks notice is up. Now, she goes to a dinner party engagement. Her new boss, coincidentally, is with her at this dinner party. And the subject of UFOs comes up. She's talking to a couple other friends, and her new boss could sense, and he was very intuitive. He could sense that this new hire was getting beat up. I mean, she was getting clobbered by these people. They were ridiculing her and laughing at her, pointing fingers. You believe in UFOs, and she was getting laughed at. So this boss of hers turns to the primary witness here and said, "You want to see the real evidence?" And so she turns to him and she says, "Now?" And he says, "Now." So he takes her in his car. They drive to Wright Patterson Air Force Base. Now, he had the correct security clearances to get access to the facility. They walk down this corridor. There's a retinal scanner where he puts his eyes in there. It reads his pupil. There's also a key card entry. So he had to put in a magnetic key card. It gave him clearance and access. So the doors open up. They walk down another corridor where there's another retinal scanner and a magnetic slot where he has to put in his key card. He has the correct security clearance. The doors open up. And what it leads them to is an underground morgue below Wright Patterson Air Force Base. So basically, he opens up one of these drawers, and out on this roller tray comes an ET dead corpse. It is half zipped up in a body bag, and she's literally standing above this thing, looking at this thing. She's a foot away from this, and she's shocked. She can't believe what she's seeing. Now, it completely destroyed her reality on what her beliefs were about our place in the universe. The implications were so staggering to her, it absolutely shattered her world belief. This is talked about in the report. So you can see the implications of what this means is very big. It's huge. Yeah. Now, to wrap up this particular case, when she reported Monday morning to work, she's ready to go to work. The office manager told her that her boss died He was never mentioned in the obituaries, and he completely disappeared off the face of the earth. So
Wow.
he could be unalived, quote
Yeah.
unquote, unalived. Maybe he wasn't supposed to show her. Obviously not. She wasn't cleared for this. So he must have got into big trouble, but there was no reference of his death in the local obituary. He completely disappeared off the radar screen. So we took this as a guide and we went to the full color rendering. And I got a world exclusive for you here by Ephraim.
Wow.
And now you can kind of see what was going on. I mean, this lady was shocked to her core seeing this dead ET corpse. I mean, does this look Russian? No. Something's going on here. So, in this presentation, I just wanted to give you some of the top, I would say top 10 or 15 that we've looked at really briefly here of the firsthand military sources within the Stringfield collection. Now, I'm going to unshare my screen here and we'll go back to just going back. Hopefully we can see each other here. Yeah. The goal here is just to present an important part of our national history by the use of these illustrations to make these cases come alive. And what we want to do here now, it's 2024. This is literally, Vinny, the last curtain call on UFO crash retrieval witnesses. All of the legacy witnesses are almost all gone now. So that's why it's incumbent upon us to track down these legacy witnesses, have them come forward in open congressional hearings as a complete united coalition, as one voice. This is going to be the vehicle that facilitates disclosure.
Absolutely incredible. Some absolutely mind-blowing cases there. Good to see cases like Cash-Landrum, which I'm familiar with, but then some which, completely never heard of before, but just equally as interesting. So thank you as always for presenting that. If you don't mind just hanging around for 2 minutes after we stop recording, that would be great. But once again, thank you so much.
Great. Good to be with you.
And to everyone watching, I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you go and follow all of the links in the description of this video to see Michael's work. But for now, take care and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.